Okay, well, I can't drop that Peter Dutton suggestion without giving you a follow-up question on that. How outlandish a suggestion is that, or even credible? Joe Hockey, it seems like, is barracking for that, but here we're talking about the former leader of the opposition, who, of course, spent months and months on the campaign trail just trashing Albanese's,
Yes.
defense strategy, the way he's handling the economy. I mean, everything really.
Now, they apparently always got along pretty well personally, despite their significant political differences. So they have a good rapport. The difference would be, could you imagine Peter Dutton prosecuting the Albanese government's agenda in Washington? It seems like an outlandish idea. We have to kick the tires on all these things because there's often, it's an interesting time. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of names being floated. Some people are moving chess pieces around the board. Is it a chance to someone who's hanging around that it would be a useful place to send them? There's all types of agendas at play with a job like this.
When Kevin Rudd announced on Monday that he'd be leaving his post as ambassador to the United States a year early, it was, for many, a penny drop moment. Wasn't this inevitable? His days numbered ever since his incredibly awkward meeting with American President Donald Trump in the White House in October. Today, Foreign Affairs and National Security correspondent Matthew Knott on where this leaves our relationship with the most mercurial American president in recent memory. Matt, welcome back to the Morning Edition.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
Okay, well, I can tell the listeners I've been so excited to speak to you about this, but I guess let's just start with how big a deal is this, that Kevin Rudd is leaving really this crucial role a year early. To those listeners who don't necessarily pay attention to who our diplomats are, why does this matter?
Well, the Australian ambassador to the United States, it's definitely the most prestigious and arguably most important diplomatic posting that we have. Of course, the US is our most important security partner, particularly at a time like now where we have the Trump administration that's so unusual, to put it mildly, chaotic is probably a more accurate word. Traditional alliances aren't valued like they used to be. Say under Joe Biden, that was an easier task for a government and a diplomat to deal with. So it's important for our chief diplomat there to have access to the administration. It's very much more personal than, say, in other times you need to build personal relationships with the White House and the rest of the administration. They're not so much into diplomatic niceties. So it's extremely important. The idea is you have to be seen as a representative of the Prime Minister in Washington.
And so can you perhaps just tell us what the ambassador actually does and how much they are a make or break person in terms of Australia getting what it wants out of the United States?
They can be exceptionally important. Their job is to be incredibly well connected, to know what's going on, to hopefully see what's coming down the line so that the Australian system can prepare. Now, that's tricky with Trump because it's so chaotic and unpredictable. People haven't known what's coming, for example, on tariff rates. We saw in the first Trump administration that, Joe Hockey's influence did play a role in advocating for Australia not to be hit with particular tariffs. It really can matter. I remember speaking to Trump's former chief of staff at the time, Mick Mulvaney, who was saying the fact that they had a personal relationship with Hockey meant Australia got better outcomes than, say, a country like Malaysia or another country, was simply because of the personal rapport that's there. So there's a lot of social aspects to the job. You're trying to have, a contact book that's full of names. One interesting thing some people may not know is, the Australian embassy in Washington, the residence, actually, the ambassador's residence, it has a grass tennis court that Joe Hockey restored. It's one of the only, if not the only, grass tennis courts in the northeast United States. So, for example, they use that to get any tennis lovers within the US political system really want to go and play, because many people dream of playing on a grass tennis court, and we have one. So we try and use that for diplomatic leverage, which is one of the things we have going, because it's a very competitive place to be with the different countries trying to court members of the administration. And
So
that's
any
one of
leg
the
up, even
things.
if it's just a grass tennis court.
Grass tennis court, yeah.
That's incredible. I'd love to know. Yeah, we'll have to discuss on another podcast why it's one of the only grass tennis
Yeah.
courts in the northeast
Yeah.
of the United States. I really want to know what the chatter is about whether this actually was, as Albanese announced, Kevin Rudd's own decision to leave his post a year early, because we know that the Prime Minister was, of course, under a lot of pressure to dump Rudd after that incredibly memorable meeting in the White House that Rudd had with Donald Trump in October.
Any concerns with this administration, with its stance on Palestine, climate change, or even things the ambassador said about you in the past, the Australian ambassador?
I don't know anything about him. I mean, if he said bad, then maybe he'll like to apologize. I really don't know. Did an ambassador say something bad about him? Don't tell me. I don't know. Where is he? Is he still working for you?
Yeah.
You said bad?
Before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never will. Go ahead.
I mean, it made global headlines for a reason, right?
Now, this was a big surprise, including to senior members of the government themselves. Everything about this ambassadorial role from the time Prime Minister Albanese was considering Kevin Rudd, it's very closely held. This isn't like some decisions that go to the broader caucus and even really the broader cabinet. This is a prime ministerial appointment. If you're prime minister, there are certain things you get to do and there are certain perks to the job. One is you get to pick who goes into a job like this. This was from day one Anthony Albanese's personal choice. He stood loyally by Kevin Rudd throughout the tumult of the Rudd-Gillard years. And so this was a personal choice. Now, there's been a lot of drama, particularly since Donald Trump came back on the scene as a candidate because of historical remarks that Kevin Rudd made about him.
There is more pressure tonight on the Prime Minister to replace Kevin Rudd as our ambassador to Washington after a resurfaced video showed him calling Donald Trump a village idiot.
And as the United States in the last 4 years has been run by a village idiot,
it's been a source of drama and friction and a cloud, I would say, over the relationship, a bit of a distraction, particularly, say, when Albanese was struggling, it seemed, to get a meeting with Trump. How much is that to do with Rudd and his former tweets, or how much is that to do with the priorities of the administration? So it's been a constant irritant, really, although he's been working very hard behind the scenes. We had the successful meeting in October.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to have the Prime Minister of Australia. Fantastic place.
Where there was also this kind of flare-up between Trump and Rudd. But he seemed to survive. After that, the government stared down calls for Rudd to be removed from the opposition. That was seen as the opposition went out way too hard on that. They were kind of not on the side of Team Australia. They were undermining our ambassador. So I think what we could say is that Rudd delivered that meeting. They had this agreement on critical minerals. They got a lot done. I think what we're seeing is the view that he's going out on a high. He hasn't been dumped. He hasn't been forced out. But I think he has read the tea leaves and seen that there's nothing more to be gained by hanging around for another year. And the Prime Minister's clearly accepted his resignation. He hasn't said, no, we really need you to stay for one more year to finish out your term. You're the only person who can do this job. He hasn't said that. Rudd is leaving to go back essentially to the job he had before at a think tank in New York. So I don't think Albanese was ever going to fire him. He's very loyal, not just to Rudd, but, to the members of his cabinet. He's really stood by them. He hasn't been firing ministers willy-nilly, including where there have been scandals.
But I do wonder whether there was any pressure, do you think, from the Trump administration, perhaps to get rid of Rudd early? Because, you've reported that, Rudd had to suck it up when Trump sort of belittled him, really, and said that, Trump said he would never like him either, and he had to sort of suck it up. But the idea that this was a mere joke, because it sort of seemed like they made up, it was undercut a few days later when Trump said he doesn't forget those who've besmirched him. And then you also reported that just at the end of 2024, a top Trump advisor, this is Dan Scavino, who I believe is now Deputy White House Chief of Staff, he posted an ominous image on social media of sort of sand trickling through an hourglass in response to a post by Rudd. So is there any suggestion that the Trump administration has had a hand in this?
Well, the Australian government throughout has been insistent that we choose our ambassador. It was extremely unusual that in the days after Donald Trump won, this very senior, important staffer, Dan Scavino, was tweeting this. So it shows that this was known within the extended MAGA universe. Trump himself has been asked about this a lot. And you can see every time he didn't really seem to know necessarily who Kevin Rudd was or what he'd said.
I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's...
He was just vaguely aware.
Yeah.
He said something nasty about me in the past, and if he did, I don't really like him. So it wasn't top of mind. I don't think the government would ever have sacked him or bowed to that level of pressure from the Trump administration. I think it's just a matter of kind of trying to go out on a good note, just like athletes try to do, like go out before you're falling down the rankings. I think Rudd wanted to go out with his reputation intact. The president has fully backed AUKUS. They've got this deal on critical minerals. He gave Australia a pass saying, do what you can on defence spending. So that was an incredible outcome for Australia, for the Prime Minister, and Rudd did have a lot to do with that. So for him personally, it's been pretty stressful and a bit messy. But I think the government says, look, we got a lot out of his work ethic, his reputation, his expertise on China gets him into a lot of important rooms. They were his strengths. I described him as high risk, high reward. He's someone who came with a lot of controversy and some baggage, but he also came with a lot of strengths. And we've seen both of those at play. I'd expect the next person to maybe not have as significant strengths and not have as significant downsides as Rudd.
But there are some serious challenges, I guess, that whoever the new ambassador will have. I know that you reported recently that there was someone from the British Kingdom, a former top British defense official, has sort of flagged that the AUKUS Pact might collapse in some way. So maybe you can just take us through that. And there's ambiguities on both sides about AUKUS that still need to be clarified. And I think there's some question as to whether the next appointee might aggravate activists in Trump's, MAGA base, especially if they're viewed as being very strongly in favor of diversity policies or renewable energy. So it's not a non-vexed position, is it?
It's always going to be tricky, and you can't predict exactly what's going to come up from the Trump administration. There's been a lot of what I'd call low-level rumblings about different policies, some of the social media ban, some of what Australia's doing with streaming services, making them make Australian content. A lot of these issues, you see periodic complaints. There was a bit of a difference of view, certainly on recognition of Palestine. There are very different views on how to tackle climate change, all this. So the two governments are certainly not in alignment on many big issues. That has been an achievement by Albanese and Rudd to focus on points of commonality. It was much more transactional, things like critical minerals, Australia's superannuation pool of savings. They're kind of, what can America get from us? Essentially, what can we do for you, rather than this highfalutin talk of alliances and how many times we've fought in a war together.
Shared values.
Yeah, shared values. And so AUKUS has got the go-ahead from Trump. That is good, but all the details are very complicated. We still don't really know at all what was in the Pentagon review of AUKUS. We know it has recommended some changes, some tweaks. So yeah, the new ambassador is going to still have a very complicated task ahead of them, keeping up with this administration, and also just all the things that flow on from it. Everything we're seeing in the world, from Iran to Venezuela, China. Trump is going to be meeting soon with Xi Jinping. And Australia's trying to deal with all these big powers and how all this is playing out. So it's going to be a very difficult job for sure.
Okay, well, let's get into then who might be the candidates who take over, because there's been a bunch of names that have been sort of floated, some more contentious than others. So tell us, I guess, some of the main names that are being floated and what their prospects are.
Well, the first thing I'd say, speaking to many people privately, is no offense to any of the names we're going to talk about, is many people are saying there's not an outstanding, standout candidate just waiting in the wings, the obvious person. Kevin Rudd's name was up there in lights for a long time. As soon as, even before Albanese came into power, he was seen as a very well-credentialed. He would be a star pick for this job. It's different now because some of, say, the former ministers from the Rudd-Gillard years, that's a bit down in getting into political ancient history now. So some of the names that were immediately floated within Labor were Stephen Conroy, who was a former senior minister in the Rudd-Gillard years. He was a communications minister for a long time. He served in the defence portfolio in opposition for a long time, and also Joel Fitzgibbon, who was defence minister, not for very long, and in the early days of the Rudd government. So we're really talking about 15 years ago. An interesting thing about both of them are essentially lobbyists. They're running lobbying firms in Canberra. They're representing defence clients with big interests in the US. I don't think they're not banned from being ambassador, but there'd be some perhaps uncomfortable questions there if they ever have to pick between a company that they lobbied for or represented in Canberra. Particularly with Stephen Conroy, he himself has made disparaging remarks about Trump relatively recently, basically calling him a moron. Now, we've been through this whole experience with Rudd and dealing with him deleting his old tweets and essentially kind of quasi having to apologize for them. Why would the government want to go through that again? So that's definitely a downside there. There has been talk about, is it time to break the cycle a bit and put in someone who's less political, more of a bureaucrat? In Washington, you're going back to someone like Dennis Richardson. He ran the Defense Department. He ran ASIO. He was a bureaucrat, an expert in foreign affairs and national security. He went there during the Howard years and is still active in public life. Since then, it's been more former politicians. So some people are saying, would it be a chance to have a bit of a break from the politics and put in someone who doesn't have anything on the record really about necessarily how they feel about Trump? Then the other thing, which would be very interesting, is the idea of, should the government appoint someone from the other side of politics, from the conservative side of politics? Now, this would be extremely unusual. You usually want someone who's representing the government. The idea that this is getting more attention this time is because you've got a conservative Trump administration in power. So should they put someone conservative, more in line with that in there? We've seen Joe Hockey, who's a foreign ambassador, tweeting that he would support, for example, Peter Dutton being appointed to the role, that would be in the national interest for him to go. Now, we don't know what the Prime Minister will say about that, but there's a lot of names being floated. It's quite possible the names in the early days are not correct. This decision, I think, is going to be very tightly held between Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong. But it won't take too long because Rudd's leaving in March, so we'll need to know who's going to replace him pretty soon.
Okay, well, I can't drop that Peter Dutton suggestion without giving you a follow-up question on that. How outlandish a suggestion is that, or even credible? Joe Hockey, it seems like, is barracking for that, but here we're talking about the former leader of the opposition who, of course, spent months and months on the campaign trail just trashing Albanese's, defense strategy, the way he's handling the economy. I mean, everything, really.
Now, they apparently always got along pretty well personally, despite their significant political differences. So they have a good rapport. That's one thing going for it. Yeah. The difference would be, could you imagine Peter Dutton prosecuting the Albanese government's agenda in Washington? Now, the key is to minimise differences. So the ambassador won't be championing climate change per se, for example, action on climate change, which would be very difficult for Peter Dutton to do given his history. But yeah, I think there would be big questions about, could he prosecute a Labor government's agenda? Would he be seen as having the ear of the Prime Minister? It's not like he's known in Washington.
No.
We might see him as more in line with Trump-style politics, but it was quite clear during the campaign that Trump didn't know
Had
who
never heard
Peter
of him.
Dutton
Yeah.
was. So it's not like he's that well-known. He's not a star within the MAGA universe. So it seems like an outlandish idea. We have to kick the tires on all these things. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of names being floated. Some people are moving chess pieces around the board. Say if a senior cabinet minister went to do it, that would open up possibilities for other people to take. Is it a chance to someone who's hanging around that it would be a useful place to send them? There's all types of agendas at play with a job like this.
Well, we're lucky that we have you at least half of the time sort of roaming the halls of Parliament House. You'll have your ear to the ground, I'm
Yes.
sure, on it. So thanks, Matt, for
Thanks,
your time.
Sam. Thank you.